This breakfast is very special, not because of the taste, but because I got it at this shop. And this shop has this sticker at their entrance.
Addio Pizzo translates to goodbye Pizzo, and Pizzo is the amount of money that shop owners and business owners have to pay monthly to the mafia in order to be protected by them so that nothing happens to their shop or to their family. Addio Pizzo helps entrepreneurs stop paying that money by offering them free assistance, helping them go and report to the police, and also giving them free legal advice throughout the whole process and supporting them. So when you see a sticker like that, you know you're buying from someone who has decided to stop paying that money. If you're planning on coming to Palermo, you can use the interactive map on the Addio Pizzo website to know in advance which restaurants and bars have that sticker so that you can buy your souvenirs or you can eat out knowing that your money is not going to the mafia. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna walk around Palermo and use some landmarks as a backdrop to tell the history of mafia and understand more about this phenomenon in Sicily. And we start here in the city center, where you'll notice a lot of buildings like this. Buildings that were bombed and destroyed during the Second World War and never rebuilt. Palermo is the only city in Europe that was bombed during the Second World War but was never totally rebuilt. A lot of palaces were left in this condition. That has to do with the involvement of the mafia in the reconstruction of the city. Mafia widely speculated on construction. There was an incredible boom of new buildings in what was known as the Conca d'Oro. The Conca d'Oro was a part of Palermo, a beautiful valley. It was called the Golden Valley because it was all green and cultivated with orange and lemon trees. But now all you see is very ugly and very big concrete buildings, and that is the result of what it's called the sack of Palermo. The mafia in the 50s realized that there was a lot of money to be made with real estate and construction, started acquiring agricultural fields, sometimes obviously with blackmailing and force and violence, and built these horrible buildings there that have completely ruined the landscape. It was called the sack of Palermo because it really ruined the beautiful part of Sicily, made the mafia also so much money and gave them more power right after the Second World War that basically put Palermo in their hands. When they realized there was a lot of money to be made in real estate by reconstructing Palermo, a lot of really bad people got really greedy, and that led to the mafia wars of the 60s. These first wars reached that peak in 1963 when 7 officials of the police and the army were killed trying to defuse a bomb. This sparked a massive outrage across Italy, and the government decided to crack down on mafia. More than 2,000 people were arrested just in the following months. Unfortunately, towards the end of the 60s, the result of the trials against these people were very disappointing. A lot of them were released and not sent to jail for lack of evidence, and the punishment for many mafia bosses instead of jail was to just move them, tell them to go and live in northern Italy. But that actually made things worse. Mafia bosses in northern Italy realized there was a lot of business to be made there and got into other streams of revenue like drug trafficking and kidnappings. Now the mafia also got into the drug business, and unfortunately that was a very successful business endeavor. Drug trafficking generated Cosa Nostra $300 million a year just in the United States, where a lot of Sicilians moved and opened pizzerias to cover up their real business. That's what the American press at the time called the pizza connection. Whilst back in Italy, Sicilian mafia and Neapolitan mafia got into an alliance to try and fight the Marsigliese and get control of the heroin traffic. Unfortunately, that worked very well for the mafia, and the heroin business took off in Italy, where we had an insane amount of death per overdose every year. With drug trafficking and big finance involved, basically mafia has become like any other big industry, with turnovers that go from hundreds of millions of dollars to billions of dollars. And you can see that in Sicily. In some cities, dozens or even hundreds of bank branches popped up out of nowhere, and they were always empty. Same things with shops and restaurants. Plenty of new shops, new restaurants, but always empty, just sitting there to launder all this money. 70s mafia got stronger and started pouring money into banks and dealing with finance. The organization changed structure in the mid of the 70s, was guided by 3 main clans, one being the Corleone. Now the Corleone were coming from the countryside, very uneducated, very ignorant people, and also tremendously violent. The Corleonesi were in the game and they had a big slice of that pie and they wanted more. So we entered into what were called the Second Mafia Wars. Between the end of the 70s and the mid 80s, things were absolutely brutal in Palermo. We're talking bombings and shootings on the streets almost every other day. Just between 1981 and 1983, over 600 people were killed and hundreds more just disappeared, probably melted in acid and thrown in the ocean, because those were the brutal methods methods of the Corleonesi and the others. One of the people who died on those years is the Army General Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, who had distinguished himself for fighting terrorism and was sent to Palermo in an attempt to curb the mafia, because in those years they were, matter of fact, acting like a terrorist organization. His role was crucial in the fight against mafia. He decided, for example, that rather than relocating mafia bosses to northern Italy, they should have been sent to the island of Asinara, Linosa and Lampedusa, where they would be isolated and locked up so they couldn't keep running the mafia business like they were doing. In 1982 was brutally murdered. He was driving with his wife. A motorbike just showed up next to them. The person behind the motorbike pulled out an AK-47 and started shooting. That was a fairly common thing to see in Palermo, unfortunately, and something you might expect if you were working and fighting against the mafia, whether you were a judge or a person of the army. So now we should go and have a look in the tribunal, where there's an entire wall of memory dedicated to people like him and heroes like him. And here, just a few minutes walk from the tribunal, there's the Wall of Legality, which is a wall of 70 meters, one of the longest murales in Italy, depicting the victims of the mafia. Now, these are all carabinieri, policemen, judges, prosecutors, journalists that were killed by Cosa Nostra. It's a quote from Giovanni Falcone, the biggest symbol of the anti-mafia fight. Men come and go, but their ideas stay and walk on the legs of other men. Him and Borsellino and the others knew their lives were at risk. They knew something was going to happen to them because of how much they spoke up and how much they did to fight this horrible organization. They knew that if they showed how brave they were, this bravery was going to inspire other people, and that has happened. They are heroes for most of us Sicilians here. The one you see behind me is a mural of a photo that many Sicilian kids of my generation had hanging on their bedrooms. These are two true heroes, the judges Paolo Borsellino and Giovanni Falcone. They were both from Palermo and dedicated their entire lives fighting the mafia, getting enormous results. Together they managed to prosecute and arrest hundreds of people. Over 400 people were arrested, and in total were given 2,665 years of prison. Obviously a very important landmark when we're talking about mafia and anti-mafia fight. It's the Tribunal of Palermo, which is so big it became a small city within the city. It has like actual streets, and the main square of the city, you can call it, between the two main buildings, is the memory square, so dedicated to the memory of the people, especially judges and prosecutors who died to fight mafia, people like Borsellino, Falcone, Francesca Morvillo, Rocco Chinnici. When thanks to their relentless work of investigations, Paolo Borsellino and Giovanni Falcone held the so-called maxi trial, a giant trial against mafia, they couldn't hold it in the tribunal, despite the tribunal being built like a tribunal, so with a lot of safety and security measures. They had to build a bunker hall inside the jail, completely fortified, to make sure that nothing would happen during the trial, because it was very likely those times, given how ruthless and brutal mafia was, they would have blown up this entire building. And the judges sometimes themselves had to live in bunker halls hidden in different jails with their families, because they were a walking human target. And they were part of what was known as the anti-mafia pool. The anti-mafia pool was a group of judges and prosecutors that were sharing their information for two reasons. One, obviously to help each other in the investigation. The other one was to protect themselves, so they could decentralize their knowledge, so the mafia wouldn't target just one judge who was investigating, because everyone was investigating and everyone knew the same things. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough to deter the cowards who killed those two people. And on the 23rd of May 1992, Giovanni Falcone is coming back to Palermo and he's on the highway. 500 kgs of explosive are detonated and he was killed brutally and cowardly by the mafia. Shortly after, the 19th of July, Paolo Borsellino was also blown up. It's important to know that Borsellino was investigating not just the mafia, but the relationship between mafia and state and national level, in particular with some politicians like Marcello Dell'Utri, who was a close friend of Silvio Berlusconi, who then became Prime Minister of Italy. The little red notebook says, "Someone wanted me to never be found." And he died. He had this little red notebook where apparently he had all his notes about these investigations, and there's footage of a policeman picking it up. No one knows where this little red book is gone. It's just disappeared, because it probably contained something that people who were too important didn't want anyone to know. The two bombings of Capaci and Via D'Amelio and the killing of the judges Falcone and Borsellino sparked enormous outrage and a huge backlash across Italy. Finally, the government decided to act swiftly and strongly and send down to Sicily tens of thousands of men from the army to curb the phenomenon, and most importantly approved
the detention regime 41 bis. 41 bis is a very controversial law according to which people condemned for certain crimes can have their rights suspended while in jail for public safety reasons. In particular, with mafia bosses, that meant being able to completely isolate them, putting them in a single cell and with no contact whatsoever with the outside world. And as controversial as that may sound, it really worked. These people couldn't stand living like that and finally started talking and collaborating with investigators and prosecutors, helping them uncover more and more information. That eventually led to the capture of Toto Riina, the main mafia boss of the Corleone gang, who was then replaced by Bernardo Provenzano, who followed a different strategy. Rather than an open-air confrontation of war against the Italian government and the civil society, he decided that mafia should go underground and just deal with public tenders, politics, drug trafficking, these revenue streams. That takes us to an important point I wanted to make on this video, because when you're Sicilians like me and you introduce yourself, people often ask and joke about mafia and tell you, oh, do you know someone? No. Sicilians hate mafia and see it for what it is. Mafia to us is what a tapeworm is for a person. It's just a parasite sucking resources and making everything worse. The most annoying thing is that even if there are no bombings and shootings on the street, you still feel its presence and see it. For example, when the cities are covered in rubbish, or when buildings that make no sense pop up out of nowhere and you wonder who could possibly authorize the construction of this. Scarcity of water, terrible motorways, terrible railways. Companies who win the contracts to manage these things, they usually just getting them because they know someone who knows someone, or with bribery and corruption. That's a real shame, because this island would be much better without them. And we all know it, and we all want to get rid of him. Because like the Judge Falcone said, mafia is a human phenomenon, and like every human phenomenon, eventually it will end. We just need to keep fighting and standing up against it. Sicily and Palermo shouldn't be defined by mafia. They're beautiful, vibrant and friendly places, and we have a video on Palermo coming up where, on top of showing you the best sights and history, we will also try some amazing street food. So if you like the sound of that, remember to subscribe to follow our adventures. Mr. Coconut would love that. Say hello, Mr. Coconut. Hello.